What they have proposed, when you take a look at the original Hebrew word for firmament, the word they use there is rakia. Has very strange implications. It literally translated means to pound together into thin sheets of metal and stretch across the arch of heaven. Wait a minute. Something solid in a crystalline structure made out of water in the heavens? Something doesn't stack up here. However, it is true that at least some of the elements of water, such as hydrogen, can take on a metallic state. For example, metallic hydrogen, when it takes on that metallic state, is a crystalline structure. It's metallic. It's transparent or opaque. It was two different stages. It's superconductive. That's interesting. It's ferromagnetic. It stores a magnetic charge. It's fiber optic. It transmits light. And it glowed pink. 65, 63 angstrom magenta to be precise. And I forgot my pink sunglasses. Oh well, I'll try and bring them another night to show you. I have a pair of pink glasses I wear now whenever I drive. I love them. Absolutely love them. I know I'm strange. That's okay. You would love them too if you tried them. So let's take a quick look at this for a second. Let's assume for a second that there was a structure in the heavens made out of water in a metallic state, some kind of metallic state. Now, I'll just mention this in passing. NASA right now is spending a pile of money trying to develop metallic hydrogen. They believe they can actually make it not only metallic, but stable at room temperature and atmospheric pressure. These properties were predicted decades before they were demonstrated. So most likely, all the other predictions are true, including the predictions that it can be stable at room temperature and atmospheric pressure. They will probably turn out to be true. Research is being carried on about that right now. The most likely place for that canopy would most likely be at about 10 miles altitude. There's a number of reasons for that. There's a temperature drop there. There's a stronger, slightly stronger magnetic band there from the Earth's magnetic field. But how would it stay up there? And the first thing that comes to mind, I don't care what you make it out of, be it metal, wood, plastic, anything, it's not going to be able to stay up there. However, this state, it would be both ferromagnetic and superconductive. Oh, that changes everything. Has anybody here ever heard of the Meissner effect? I'm curious. Nobody. Okay, I'm surprised. Okay, it's actually a common effect. They play with superconductors all the time. You take a magnet, you take a superconductor, put it on top of the magnet, and it will actually hover on top of the magnet. Because what happens is the moment that magnet moves, or the superconductor moves, the magnetic field induces a voltage in it, which induces a magnetic field, which repels the other magnetic field. What does Earth have? A magnetic field. Suddenly we have a mechanism for how such a canopy could stay up there. And it's the only way. Okay, that's interesting. It was fiber optic. We talked about this the other day. Even if it was tropical on the North and South Poles, so what? The Axel Heiberg plants were tropical vegetation. They were tropical trees. Trees and plants need light intensity. They don't just need light, they need light intensity. And the problem with the Arctic is, even when the sun comes above the horizon, it's only a couple of degrees above the horizon. The evidence we saw showed that the trees on Axel Heiberg Island, only about 10 degrees from the North Pole, saw no winter, had plenty of nutrients, plenty of water, plenty of warmth. They grew like mad. That's what the evidence says. Now, let's assume for a second that they actually grew there. I don't think they did, but let's assume that for a second. How can they grow there? It's nighttime for half the year. But not if there was a canopy before the flood. because suddenly that canopy is fiber optic. So that means light coming from the lit side of the Earth would be transmitted fiber optically to the dark side of the Earth and the North and South Pole. You now have light on the Earth 24/7, 365 days a year, including on the North and South Pole. Problem solved. You can start to see why I think they're onto something here. This would also explain the tropical conditions on the North and South Pole. Now, let's move right along here. Okay, get a load of what Josephus said. Josephus, in Book 1, Chapter 1, verse 30, specifically states that God created a crystalline firmament round about the earth. He was very specific with his word. A crystalline firmament made out of water. So we have extra biblical sources that seem to back this up. There has been legends from the Indians that talked about a time when the sky hung low. Apparently, there was something solid in the sky in times past. Okay, moving right along here. Okay, if this canopy was at 10 miles altitude, here's what it would do. It would roughly double our atmospheric pressure. That's key. I'm going to come back to that lots. It would filter out ultraviolet light. Oh, we talked about carbon-14 dating the other day. Where does carbon-14 come from? Ultraviolet light. So if we had no ultraviolet light before the flood, that means we had no carbon-14 before the flood. That means when we find something now that has no carbon-14 in it, it could mean it's just from before the flood and not millions and millions of years old. The conditions have changed. So it would also slightly enrich oxygen levels. That has more to do with geology than the canopy. When you reverse the chemistry of the massive limestone beds we have around the world, you have increased carbon dioxide levels and increased oxygen levels. Basically, that's the bottom line. We would have an increased strength of the Earth's electromagnetic field. That is based on current measurements taking place right now. The Earth's electromagnetic field is deteriorating at roughly a half-life of every 1,400 years. So in other words, 1,400 years ago, it was twice as strong as it is now. So at the time of the flood, it would have been roughly 8 times as strong as it is now. So that's what that means. So back at the time of the flood, the Earth's magnetic field would have been roughly 8 times as strong. Now, what would happen if we were to simulate some of these conditions? You saw some of the things that have happened that we find throughout the fossil record, giant plants, for example. Dr. Kei Mori at Keio University, Tokyo, Japan, as most Japanese do, he had a small miniature cherry tomato plant. He put it in his basement and wanted to light it, but the thing is he didn't want to pay for more electricity. So he took fiber optic cable from the university. I don't know if he had permission or not, but he took a fiber optic cable, ran it down from his roof into his basement to provide a light for his plant. What he clued into after the fact was the diameter of the fiber optic cable actually filtered out ultraviolet light. In so doing, he inadvertently simulated one of the conditions of this world before the flood that we are proposing. Only one. Now, his cherry tomato plant grew out of control, so he had an idea. He built a gasket system around the stalk, pressurized it. Oh, pressurized it. Wait a minute. He's now simulating another condition of that world before the flood. He knew it would need more carbon dioxide, because that's what plants eat, so he pumped in carbon dioxide. 2 years later, wait a minute, how long do your tomato plants live? 6 months? Yeah. Oh, they live? Oh. What are you doing different, huh? Anyway. Yeah, that's right, yeah, well, even without winter, your tomato plants are going to die of old age. Typically 6 months. However, after 2 years, his tomato plant was 16 feet tall. This is a cherry tomato plant. It had 800 baseball-sized tomatoes growing on it. Now, there's the plant on display back then. However, the story doesn't end there. The last report we heard, there's the most recent photo. They now had to build a superstructure because the plant was so big. All he did was continue to build a canopy around it to protect it from ultraviolet. The gasket system was still there, increased carbon dioxide, increased atmospheric pressure. That's all he did. The last report we had, the plant is probably dead now, the last report we had was probably about 4 years ago. It was 16 years old. They had moved it to the university. It was 45 feet tall and had roughly 15,000 baseball-sized tomatoes on it. Now here's the catch. The tomatoes stay green until you pick them. It's a natural storage system. The world before the flood was a remarkable place. Absolutely remarkable, if this model is true. And you can start to see why I think he's correct. Simulating only 3 conditions, we have now replicated what we find in the fossil record, giant plants. So, the effects, however, on human physiology are quite staggering. The reason I like my pink glasses, pink actually causes your brain to react, and it secretes a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. It's related somewhat to epinephrine, which is what you find in EpiPens for allergic reactions. It's a neurotransmitter, also a relaxant. Helps you think more, it calms you down, helps you think better. I did some research a number of years ago using pink light and whatnot with some children. I just had them do some math problems. I wasn't quite happy with the experiments, but the preliminary results were that it actually dramatically helped them with their math. I want to go back and redo those experiments because I was kind of fumbling around, didn't really know what I was doing at the time. This was 15 years ago, something like that. It was a long time ago, but the effects of these conditions on the human body are quite mind-boggling. For example, under these conditions of the pre-flood world that I'm talking about, open wounds, and for example, if you cut yourself, that can heal in as little a time as 45 minutes. This is why they're building hyperbaric chambers all around the world in hospitals. They're using them right, left, and center. They've had tremendous success with them. Now, those are called hyperbaric chambers, by the way, in hospitals. Dr. Ed Blick, who works with NASA, is also a consultant with the Creation Evidence Museum, estimated that under those pristine conditions, humans potentially could run up to 200 miles without fatigue. That's pretty dramatic predictions. Now, unfortunately, we can't make the chamber 200 miles long to test it. It would be very hard to do. We could stick a treadmill in there, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. So here's what has now transpired. This is at the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. This is the world's first hyperbaric biosphere. Within it, they're attempting to simulate the world as they see it from before the flood. So it's a pressure chamber, 2 atmospheres of pressure, increased electromagnetic field, 24/7 pink light. You can see the pink filters in the windows. The lines are for the electromagnetic field. Slightly enriched oxygen, only slightly enriched carbon dioxide, etc., etc. Now, let's take a look at some of the studies that have been carried out. Oh, by the way, they're going upscale. This is in the museum. That's roughly 50 feet long. This is the next size up. I'm very pleased to say this museum right now that is housed in is being finished right now as we speak. And they're hoping to open up in June of this year, is the plan. The building needs to be finished before they can bring that hyperbaric biosphere online. That's one of the reasons I'm happy to hear them get the museum finished. The fact that Carl also owns the largest out-of-place artifacts collection in the world is another reason I would like to see the museum finished. I would like to see his stuff on display. So that's the next step up, is that biosphere right there, and there it is inside. Now, they put copperhead snakes inside that biosphere I just showed you. Now, copperhead venom today, of course, is incredibly toxic. You get bit by it, boy, you better seek help. Now, this is what it looks like under an electron microscope. Very disordered, and it is actually, it will attack both your nerves, your blood cells. It's just very, very nasty stuff. However, after 2 weeks in the biosphere, when I was talking to Carl about this, Dr. Baugh, he said he was not expecting to see any results until the 2nd, 3rd, or possibly 4th generation. They saw results within the 1st generation within 2 weeks. They sampled the snake venom. Take a look at what happened to it. Now, nobody's actually tested this to find out if it's still toxic or not, but it is believed it may no longer be toxic. Now, just last year, they finally got results back from the analysis of the protein. What they discovered was that they have now enhanced some proteins, reduced other proteins. The snake now produces proteins that have never been produced before. Others that it did produce before as part of the venom are completely gone. they have radically altered the snake venom. So it's possible that before the flood, I mean, who knows what the snakes have their teeth and fangs and the venom for? We don't know. Maybe it's for eating fruit and it dissolves the fruit. I don't know. I wasn't there. That's part of the research that will be coming up next. The point I'm making here is we typically judge the current conditions by what we, or the past conditions by what we see now. But it doesn't work. For example, there's a characteristic within some fish called coprophagousness. And that is basically, well, let me tell you the story. Texas A&M was really the university that started all this research into hyperbarics. They were sort of the groundbreakers in this area. And they had a hyperbaric chamber with increased atmospheric pressure, increased oxygen, etc. They had birds and fish living in this one chamber. The fish weren't eating the food they gave them, but the fish were still growing out of control. What on earth is going on here? It turns out the fish were eating the droppings from the birds. They were coprophagous. They were eating the droppings from the birds and getting their complete nutritional value from it. You see, everything changes under these conditions. The world before the flood was apparently a wonder world. Now, sadly, we're going to destroy it all. Well, the Lord's going to destroy it all. In Genesis 6:6, it makes a very sad statement. It says, God repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And then, in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, it starts the whole catastrophe. Now pay close attention to this. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, the windows of heaven were opened, and it rained upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In that order. That's key, okay? Now, what I'm going to share with you here is a model proposed by Dr. Walter T. Brown. He's a PhD in mechanics and physics. He was actually the first doctorate paid for by the military, the U.S. military. The U.S. military actually paid for his education. And he has compiled decades worth of research into this model that I'm going to share with you now. I think it is just an incredible model. It is by far the most superior as to explaining why the earth has experienced a global flood. Where the water came from, where it went. What we've been looking at in the classes is the absolute overwhelming evidence for that global flood. You have to be blind not to see it, willfully blind not to see it. The earth has experienced a global flood. Now, there has been a couple of deep boreholes, and that's basically geologists get out there with a big drill, and they drill down really, really, really deep to see what's down there. Several of them gone quite deep, 5 to 7 miles deep. Almost always they've had to stop the projects too early, and they couldn't go as deep as they wanted to because the rock got hotter faster than they thought it would. Okay, and that's important. I'm going to come back to that. But these deep boreholes revealed salty water, circulating salty water, between 5 and 7 miles deep. Hold on a minute here. This is a major problem, major question. Why do we have circulating salt water down there? And also as part of that question, why do we have lava flows coming to the surface? See, when you take a look at geology textbooks and earth history and earth science books, they have a nice picture of the molten magma of earth with a crack and the magma is coming up from the core of the earth and coming to the surface. Hogwash can't happen. First of all, you got to remember that's tens of miles. The lava will cool and plug the hole long before it gets to the surface. Secondly, the weight of the rock alone, once you get down to the 5-mile mark, the weight of that rock alone pinches closed even the most microscopic crack. So how on earth are we getting so much lava coming to the surface with volcanoes, etc.? It's not coming from the core of the earth, so it has to be coming from shallow subsurface. Continental shelf and the mid-oceanic ridge, I'm going to go into those in a lot of detail. That's a major feature explained within the hydroplate model and the jigsaw puzzle fit of those continents. Now, plate tectonics, most people are surprised to hear this, plate tectonics fails under scrutiny. We're always taught in class, plate tectonics explains how the continent's divided. You remember I pointed out that the Bible said all the waters under the heavens were collected into one place? There was a gentleman who read that many centuries ago and concluded that that means the land was gathered into one place. He was a creationist, and he is the first one who suggested continental division. Continental division was then hijacked later on by the old earthers and converted into plate tectonics to prove that the Bible was clearly wrong. So again, the history and behind all that. Plate tectonics, however, doesn't work. Number one, no mechanism for moving the continents. We're told it's convection currents in the lavas. That's nowhere near enough power. You're going to see why in a second. It just does not work. Secondly, when you take a look at, okay, I'll show you the cracks in a minute. This is typically what you see on the coastlines of the continents. So what you have is the continent itself coming down to the water, a gradual slope, typically coming down to the 300 to 600 foot mark. The Grand Banks in Newfoundland is a classic example. Usually they're smaller than that, but in some cases, like the Grand Banks, they're huge. So you have this continental shelf. It comes down to about 300 to 600 feet, drops off drastically to the ocean floor at the continental slope. The ocean floor will typically be 12,000 feet deep on average. That's typically what you see on the edge of the continents. Roughly, you will also see the transition from granite to basalt. Okay, so keep that in mind for a second. There is the layout of the planet, and I'm going to go to the globe here in a second. What I want to point you to is the largest mountain range on planet Earth. The problem is you don't see it because it's underwater. Tell them I said hi. Okay. I'm sorry, I just like doing that. And one of these days, someone's going to call me in the middle of one of my talks. I know it. I did that to my friend Vance once in the middle of his lecture. He's standing in front of like 200 people, and I call him, hello. Anyway, the largest mountain range in the world. It's underwater. You never see it. It is the longest mountain range in the world as well. So it's huge. It's under the ocean. It is made up of the basalt. Now, I don't know, I'm curious, has anybody seen this in the textbook they took in school? Or has anybody seen that in school? One guy recognizes it too. Okay, a few people recognize it. It's hit and miss there. I don't recall seeing it recently. Now, it looks impressive at first. It almost looks like, hey, those continents just might fit together like that. Maybe, huh? However, he took a few, Mr. Bullard took a few, shall we say, creative liberties to get them to fit that well. For instance, southern Mexico and Central America, gone. Where'd they go? He just removed them. No explanation given. It's a slice between Africa and Europe. They're then rotated opposite each other. And what you don't realize, unless you actually sit there and measure it, Africa has actually been reduced in size by 35%. Apparently all just to make a better fit. So that doesn't really stack up to scrutiny. Okay, it's a nice model. Sure, maybe it was like that. I don't know. But it doesn't really stack up to scrutiny. I'm going to show you what I think is a better model. Now, when we come back to plate tectonics, the mid-oceanic ridge is supposed to be where the lavas come up or go down. It's sort of like the end of the conveyor belt. Okay? The thing is, the end of the conveyor belt often overlaps the end of another conveyor belt and often meet each other at almost right angles. How on earth are these supposed to be spreading? They're called overlapping spreading centers. They're assumed to spread, though there's not one shred of evidence that they do. All they are is cracks. Really, that's all they are. But they're assumed to be spreading, so they call them overlapping spreading centers. It doesn't work. Just like a train can't run on tracks that aren't parallel, these conveyor belts can't run opposite each other and still work. So plate tectonics doesn't fit. Now, this is in the west coast of Canada. This is just north of Banff. And when you take a look at mountain ranges like this, there's several questions that come to mind. First of all, what on earth would fold mountains like that? We are talking a lot of energy here, a pile of energy. As you'll see in a minute, according to Walt's model, and he's done the math on this, the continent slid apart at up to 45 miles an hour. When it slammed into the mid-continental shelf or mid-oceanic ridge on the other side, gee, I wonder why it crumpled up. If you run your car into a brick wall at 45 miles an hour, it's going to crumple up, isn't it? Don't do that, by the way, if you guys get older, okay? It's a bad idea. Okay. So that's one thing. The other point I want to point out here, this is key, you'll notice the layers are not fractured. If you take a rock and bend it, it's not going to bend, it's going to fracture. Now, some have suggested, they made wild speculation, they said, oh, well, that's because the mountain was driven deep underground, miles underground, and the heat and the pressure made the rock soft and it was able to bend without cracking. Nonsense. That would cause what we call metamorphosis, and there is no metamorphosis in these layers. I know I can say that because I've been there and I studied the rock personally. Furthermore, these layers have fossils in them. I know because I've seen them and I've studied them personally. You would destroy the fossils if you drove that mountain miles underground to tremendous heat and pressure, enough to bend the layers. The most logical, simple explanation is the layers were still soft when the mountain was folded. Dead simple. So the simplest one wins. Okay. Now, here's Brown's model in a nutshell. Roughly 2/3 of what is now in our oceans was underground in subterranean chambers some 10 miles under the granite crust, between the granite crust and the basalt. It was in interconnected chambers. So there are pillars and walls, etc., that are connecting the two halves, but all the water was in interconnected chambers. Something caused the water temperature to increase. That's the only two assumptions really that are needed. Now, you kids, I do not want you doing this at home. Okay? So I'm going to warn you, okay? No, I'm serious. Don't do this at home. What I'm going to talk about is very, very dangerous, okay? First of all, is anybody willing to admit that, you know the nice little radiator cap on your car, and it says, caution, do not open when hot? Has anybody opened that while it's hot? Kinda. Yeah? Was it bad? Oh, yeah, it burns, yeah. Yes. Let me introduce you to the steam explosion. Steam explosions are nasty. Very, very, very dangerous. I know one train, it was a major train disaster when they used steam locomotives. They let the boiler get too dry, and they had a steam explosion. Killed the entire crew, killed a whole pile of people on the train. It was bad. If we're scaling up, we could estimate that the Huckleberry Ridge Tuff, just one eruption, was the energy equivalent of 2 million megatons of TNT. You can start to see where Walt gets his numbers when he says the hydroplate event was a cataclysmic flood whose waters erupted from worldwide subterranean interconnected chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs.